So with that, it's now my great pleasure to be able to introduce the Chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission, Edith Ramirez, who will be giving our opening keynote. The Chairwoman was appointed to the FTC by President Obama in 2010, designated to serve as chair in 2013. For us, it's an especially great privilege because in her role as a commissioner and now as chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, she's really taken on a major leadership role in the United States and internationally addressing privacy issues. I can't resist mentioning this. She previously practiced law as a partner in the Quinn Emanuel firm, which is well known to Fordham as it's Quinn Emanuel Urquhart. Bill Urquhart is one of our graduates. And with that, I don't want to take any more time. I'll ask the chairwoman to come up and give her keynote. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel, and I'm really delighted to be here with all of you this morning to have a chance to speak at today's symposium, and I want to thank the Center for the kind invitation. In thinking about the program for today, it certainly was a daunting task. The agenda is certainly ambitious, but I can understand why it's so ambitious. We're really at a critical juncture today. It was less than a decade ago that Apple introduced the iPhone, and yet approximately half of all adults today worldwide have a smartphone. And it's estimated that by 2020, 80% of all adults worldwide will have a smartphone. And we're increasingly dependent on our mobile devices. Some might even say that we are addicted to them. Americans reach for a smartphone an astonishing 150 times a day on average, and most of us start doing that within minutes of the time that we wake up. But mobile devices are only part of today's digital landscape. Another important development is the growth of the Internet of Things. As of this year, the world will have 25 billion connected devices, and the number of smart home devices will reach nearly 25 million. So without doubt, the potential benefits from these new technologies are enormous. Today, apps are being used to track patient health and improve medical research. Mobile payment mechanisms are providing the underbanked access to financial services. And mobile device tracking is being used in city planning and congestion management, to cite but a few examples. And of course, this is only the beginning. But at the same time that they have the potential to improve global health, spur economic growth, and modernize city infrastructures, these new technologies also create significant risks. The connected devices that provide increased convenience and improve health and other services are also collecting, transmitting, storing, and often sharing vast amounts of consumer data, some of it highly sensitive, thereby creating a number of significant privacy risks. And when data crosses physical borders in our virtual and interconnected world, the privacy challenges become even more complex. So let me go back to the question that we're here to address this morning. What are the solutions to our global privacy challenges? I'm going to offer a modest response, and in my view, a key part of the answer lies at the company level, and it lies in building consumer trust. A recent study by Pew Research Center revealed that 91% of those surveyed believe that consumers have lost control over how information is collected and used. Our shared challenge is to build consumer trust by ensuring that consumers have control over their personal information while also reaping the benefits of new technologies. So this morning, what I'd like to do is to address the steps that I think businesses should take to protect consumer privacy and build consumer trust. But before I turn to those solutions, I'd like to spend a few minutes elaborating on what I see to be the 3 key privacy challenges of today's connected world. The first one is the ubiquitous collection of personal information, of our habits, our location, our physical condition over time. In the not too distant future, many, if not most aspects of our everyday lives will leave a digital trail. And that data trove will contain a wealth of revealing information that, when patched together, will present a deeply personal and startlingly complete picture of each of us. One that includes details about our financial circumstances, our health, our religious preferences, and our family and friends. The introduction of sensors and devices into currently intimate spaces like our homes, our cars, and even our bodies poses particular challenges and increases the sensitivity of the data that's being collected. Connected devices are effectively allowing companies to digitally monitor our otherwise private activities. Connected and mobile devices also facilitate the sharing of data to other entities and increase the potential for unexpected uses. If a consumer uses a fitness band, which records her heart rate, her level of activity each day, and other personal details, she may not understand that the information could be shared with third parties, like advertisers, data brokers, or even insurance companies. With big data analytics, companies use the information generated by connected and mobile devices to create sensitive, comprehensive profiles and to repurpose the information without consumers' knowledge or consent. In the study that the Federal Trade Commission conducted last year on the data broker industry, we learned that data brokers combine the online and offline data they obtain and that they segment consumers into categories, some of which are based on sensitive information and characteristics like race, ethnicity, income, and socioeconomic status. And most consumers are not even aware that there is such an industry as the data broker industry. This raises questions about the extent to which the unexpected sharing of information could affect the offers consumers see online, the prices that they're charged, and the level of consumer service that they receive. Third, the proliferation of connected devices also heighten security risks. Like desktop computers, connected and mobile devices with inadequate security are vulnerable to intrusion, which could lead to the misuse of personal information. As the number of connected devices increase, so do the entry points from which an intruder could launch an attack. Protecting the security of mobile devices has been an ongoing challenge. We've also seen mobile operating systems continue to grapple with how to design APIs so that app developers do not unnecessarily access consumers' personal information. And we've seen instances where mobile app operators have inadvertently disabled SSL encryption and failed to secure the transmission of consumers' personal information. The concern about mobile security only increases as new mobile payment methods emerge. IoT devices present other unique security risks. For example, the small size and limited processing power of many connected devices could inhibit encryption and other robust security measures, and the low cost and disposability of many devices may make it difficult to update the software or even apply a patch. Now that I've described the potential risks, let me turn to the three things I think businesses can do to address them. First and foremost, companies should implement privacy by design. They should create a culture that is mindful of consumer privacy and ensure that they have comprehensive data management procedures throughout the life cycle of their products and services. This includes designating personnel responsible for employee privacy training and the regular assessment of the privacy impacts of specific practices, products, and services. Companies should also incorporate substantive privacy protections, including reasonable collection limits and sound data retention practices. And let me elaborate a little bit on this last point. A key component of privacy by design is data minimization. Companies should only collect the data they need for a specific purpose and then safely dispose of it. In our recent report on the Internet of Things, we emphasize that data minimization continues to play an important role, and it's for good reason. Collecting and retaining large amounts of information increases the risk of harm from a data breach. Now, we often hear the argument that businesses should not have to face limits on the collection and retention of data because the value of data lies in its unanticipated uses. But I question the notion that we must put sensitive consumer data at risk on the chance a company might someday discover a valuable use for that information. At the same time, I do agree that we need more dialogue on acceptable and unacceptable uses of consumer data. But I continue to firmly believe that reasonable limits on data collection and retention are a necessary first line of protection for consumers. To the extent that companies collect information, they should de-identify consumer data to the extent possible. Many of the beneficial uses of data can still be realized by using de-identified data. Now, admittedly, de-identification isn't perfect. There's always the potential that ostensibly anonymized data can be re-identified. And to address this issue, sound technical strategies for making data anonymous should be coupled with administrative safeguards. Companies should publicly commit not to seek to re-identify data, and they should, through contract, require the same of those with whom they share data. Second, consumers should be able to maintain control over their privacy. They need to have meaningful notice about a company's data practices and the ability to exercise choice over unexpected collection or uses of their data. Consumers know, for instance, that a smart thermostat is gathering information about their heating habits, and I think they also know that a fitness band is collecting data about their physical activity. But would they expect this information to be shared with data brokers or with marketing firms? In many cases, not. In these and similar situations, consumers should be given clear and simple notice of the proposed uses of their data and a way that they can consent to unexpected uses. Of course, as new technologies, products, and business models emerge, companies will need to develop new ways to provide notice and choice. But I believe that the ingenuity that brought us these new technologies can also develop effective ways to provide notice to consumers on mobile phones, where small screens are often a challenge, and on IoT devices, which often may have no consumer interface at all. In the FTC's 2013 report on mobile disclosures, we acknowledged these challenges, and we made recommendations about how to improve disclosures on mobile devices. Among other things, we encourage platforms to require apps to make privacy disclosures and to enforce those requirements. We also encourage app developers to work together to provide simple, easy to understand, short-form disclosures. Some companies have made significant progress in this area, but I encourage other app developers and companies in the mobile ecosystem to take more steps to provide meaningful notice and choice to consumers. Our recent Internet of Things report and business guidance also outline ways that companies can provide greater transparency and notice and choice as new IoT products come to market. Suggestions include video tutorials, the use of QR codes, and consent mechanisms at the point of sale, within setup wizards or in privacy dashboards. Importantly, if companies are collecting sensitive information, such as health, financial, or geolocation, they should obtain affirmative express consent. Now, companies should always remember that if they represent to consumers that they will be given the opportunity to exercise choice, they must honor those promises. A recent case against Nomi Technologies, a retail tracking firm, illustrates this very simple point. Nomi offered consumers the ability to opt out of mobile device tracking via both online and in-store opt-outs. And as we alleged in our complaint, Nomi's promise of an in-store opt-out implied that consumers would receive notice that the tracking technology was being used in particular stores. But we charged that Nomi failed to, in fact, provide an in-store opt-out, depriving consumers of the ability to exercise the promised choice, hence the enforcement action brought by the FTC. So again, consumers need to ensure that any promises they make that relate to privacy are honored. And finally, my third recommendation. Companies should take steps to safeguard consumers' personal information. The importance of implementing reasonable data security cannot be overstated. We're well familiar with the many high-profile data breaches over the course of the last several years. But these challenges are only being heightened with the new and emerging technologies that we see. Our IoT report encourages companies to implement security by design by conducting a security risk assessment as part of the design process. This means testing security measures before products launch, requiring consumers to change default passwords in the setup process, considering the use of encryption, particularly for the storage and transmission of sensitive information, and monitoring products throughout their life cycle and, to the extent possible, patching known vulnerabilities. Similarly, we've encouraged mobile app developers to learn the security-related differences between different mobile platforms, to use encryption for data that is in transit and at rest, and to exercise due diligence on libraries and other third-party code. And we've also encouraged mobile payment providers to use end-to-end encryption and store payment information on a secure element that is separate from the rest of a smartphone's memory. We're working with industry to encourage adoption of these best practices, and we recently announced a new initiative that we call Start with Security. It's a comprehensive campaign that includes video tutorials, consumer education, and seminars to educate companies, especially medium and small companies, on how to improve their data security practices. And I'm pleased to announce that our first seminar will be held in San Francisco on September 9th at the University of California at Hastings College of Law. Let me just close by emphasizing that we have an important opportunity to ensure that new technologies that have the potential to provide enormous benefits develop in a way that also protects consumer information. If companies commit to the steps that I've outlined, I think we can go a long way to addressing some of the key global privacy challenges that we face and ensure that consumers can feel justifiably confident that their information will be used responsibly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Now, I know we have a little bit of time for some questions, so I'll start by opening if anyone would like to ask a question. If you could identify yourself, please, and do we have a mic floating around? Could you bring it up to the front, please?
Hi, Andy Roth, alumni of Fordham Law and former student of Joel's, and was Chief Privacy Officer of American Express for a while and back in private practice. So you mentioned payment providers and focus on privacy and security with them. Is that a new area of focus, or do you believe that payments is one of the areas that comes within sort of the jurisdictional bend of the FTC?
We're certainly focusing on new emerging mobile payment methods. We don't have jurisdiction over banks, so that is outside of our province, but we have been certainly focusing on mobile payments, and we've been doing quite a bit of work in that area. Again, I think a lot of the issues that we've confronted so far really deal with some of the basics. It's been amazing how, if you look at the more than 50 data security actions that the FCC has brought over the last several years, you'll see that it really reflects that companies, in my view, aren't paying attention to some of the key fundamentals when it comes to data security. So I think that that's one of our most significant challenges. And then when you see the growth of the Internet of Things and the challenges that we face with regard to mobile, I think we're only seeing those challenges rise over the years. And let me also just add, I didn't focus on this in my remarks, but I think another component of this is also going to have to be data security legislation. And we've been urging Congress to take action in this area, and there certainly is a considerable interest, and I hope that there will be action soon by Congress.
Got a question in the back.
Hi, my name's Steve Ehrlich. I'm an analyst for Spitzberg Partners. It's a boutique firm here in New York that helps companies with political and regulatory issues. And I was curious about your thoughts on two issues related to Europe. First, the Google antitrust suit and what you think it's going to mean for the ways that companies can operate almost around the world, and then also what your expectations are for reforming the Safe Harbor program.
Let me tackle the Google case first. As I'm sure you're aware, and many of you in the room are aware, the FTC conducted its own investigation on the competition side of our work relating to mainly Google's search practices. We concluded here that under the facts here in the United States and applying U.S. law, we concluded that there was not a violation of law, so we closed our investigation. There were some subsidiary practices on which Google did agree to make certain changes, and so that was done, and Google has implemented those changes. The EC in Europe is, of course, applying its own law, looking at its own set of facts, and one significant difference is that in Europe, Google has a much larger market share than it does here in the U.S., and there are also other distinctions in terms of the way that the market exists in Europe. And so, and in addition to that, the EU law has a different standard when it comes to an abuse of dominance standards. In my view, I think that I'm certain that the EC will apply its law and Google is, of course, in the process of preparing its response to the statement of objections that was issued by the EC. So I'll leave it at that. I will say that here in the United States, we are paying very close attention to potentially anti-competitive conduct by companies, but at the same time, we're going to be looking hard and evaluating pro-competitive justifications for any behavior that may have the impact of having a potential adverse effect on particular rivals. Ultimately, our standard and the question that we have to answer is whether there's an adverse impact on competition as a whole, and in the US we concluded that there wasn't. Let me turn to the issue of this safe harbor. As I think many of you who are here are aware, it's an issue that has been under discussion for well over a year and a half. We at the FTC, along with the Department of Commerce, who administers the Safe Harbor program, have been engaged in a dialogue with the European Commission about how to shore up the Safe Harbor program. The FTC is the enforcer of the program, and we've brought more than 20 cases to ensure that companies who certify to the Safe Harbor principles, in fact, abide by them. We've had very productive discussions, and among other things, the Department of Commerce has also added resources to ensure that the administration of the program is as robust as possible. We're certainly dedicating considerable resources to ensuring compliance at our end. We do hope to conclude our discussions with the EC soon on that. And I'm happy to answer any other aspect of that question, but that's generally where things stand vis-a-vis the Safe Harbor framework.
Florian Schaub, I'm a computer science researcher at Carnegie Mellon University. Thank you for the talk. I think your points you're making are very valid and interesting, and I've been following the FTC reports. An issue I'm not seeing there is this aspect how data practices are framed. So some health insurance companies started handing out mobile apps to their members saying, we want to track your steps, and if you reach certain goals, you get benefits, you get discounts. And this seems to kind of shift what's seen as acceptable. And I just wanted to hear what you think. Is there a need for the FTC to address this, or is it something that's okay?
Sure. I think there are two components to that. One is that there needs to be compliance with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And so when we're dealing with issues that relate to employment, for instance, housing, credit, there are particular requirements that the FCRA imposes. We at the FTC are ensuring that that is done. But once you get outside of what is governed by existing law, I think what's key in my view is that consumers agree to share information with an insurance company, for instance, because they believe that they will receive a benefit from it, that they do so through consent. And that that this sharing of information doesn't happen without their knowledge. And the concern that I have is that a lot of the sharing of information takes place behind a black box. As I mentioned earlier, we at the FTC conducted a study of the data broker industry, and this is simply an industry that the vast majority of consumers know absolutely nothing about. And what's happening is that information that we are now generating either ourselves or that we're generating through IoT devices is being shared with third parties, being shared with data brokers, and then sold and repackaged without knowledge or the consent by consumers. And to me, transparency and notice and choice is fundamental. At the same time, I also think that we need to go beyond existing law and start to examine whether there are particular uses that are troubling and that we as society don't want to have companies engage in. And I do think there needs to be a more robust conversation about whether there should be use-based restrictions. And I think we're still at an early phase in that dialogue, and that's certainly a conversation that I think we need to have.
Give them a mic.
Sorry. So what I'm saying is we probably need to have a discussion of what consent actually means. Does consent mean, yes, I consent to the data collection, or does it also have to include an educational aspect about the privacy implications and risks with this collection? And I think that's something a little bit missing from the discussion at the moment. We always talk about explicit versus implicit consent, but this consumer education aspect, I think that's something that needs more attention.
Yes, I think that that's a valid point. I think ultimately, if in my view, providing and having consent is key, and that's something that absolutely isn't happening. But clearly, there may be ramifications, and there may be certain uses of data in certain areas that we may feel present higher risks that consumers may not be aware. So I think that's a valid point to make.
Do you have time for
One more.
I think then I'm going to exercise the moderator's privilege and ask you a question. I think that the discussion of consent, I think, is going to be a fascinating one, because one of the aspects in your talk were you mentioned unexpected uses, ubiquitous collection, and user control. And in the Internet of Things world, there is a tremendous tension between those two, and I thought that was interesting. My question, though, goes to your comments on security and the importance for businesses to safeguard personal data, to encrypt. And what I wanted to ask you is, to what extent is the FTC participating now in the discussions with the intelligence community and the discussions over the cybersecurity legislative proposals that are happening, where we've seen tensions between the business world and the protection of consumer information with strong encryption, balanced where the security agencies are not are interested in having access to this data. Has the FTC been involved in some of these discussions of the importance of encryption for the business community and consumer protection as a participant at the table with some of the discussions happening in the intelligence communities and in Congress on cybersecurity legislation?
So the intelligence issues are outside of our purview, so I'll leave some of those issues to be tackled by others during the course of the day. What I will say is that we do encourage encryption. The issue as to whether or not someone has a key that law enforcement can or intelligence community can then use for law and national security purposes is sort of a different question. But in our view, having encryption, particularly when you're dealing with sensitive information, I think it is important to encrypt data. But again, whether or not there is a key.
There haven't been the discussions between the FTC and
so
the
again,
players looking.
We're not involved with the intelligence community. That's just outside of our jurisdiction, and so I've not been involved in those discussions. But what I will say is that I do believe that encryption is important. There's the separate question about whether or not there should be a key that the company itself will have, and that can then be used for law enforcement purposes.
Right. Well, please join me in thanking the chairwoman for her remarks this morning.
Thank you.